Ladies and gentlemen, the continuation of the session starting at 2 o'clock. We have 6 speakers. I'll give them 10 minutes each. I'll give them a 1-minute warning, and then I will be brutal. And then we'll have half an hour for questions, which please put onto slido.com. So I've chosen not to introduce the speakers in any length at all, to give them time, if they wish to waste it, on their own personal introductions versus actually telling us something. Slido. Well, it says slido.com there, but 7414 is the number for putting in questions for this session. So our first speaker is Jonathan Balcombe. He's Director of Animal Sentience at the Humane Society Institute for Science and Policy. So I give the floor to Jonathan, and he can say more about himself if he wishes. Jonathan?
Thank you, Vint. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, I was the director.
Not making any sense, but we can hear you okay.
I was the director of that institute, but I'm no longer with them. I'm an ethologist. Animal behavior is my training, and I write books about the inner lives of animals, how animals think and feel and how they sound. And I'm delighted to be here today to speak about a group of animals that's routinely diminished as mindless and thoughtless and primitive. And I'm not referring to humans. I'm actually referring to fishes. So let's get started here. So I want to tell you, just share in my brief time some cool things that fishes do and how that links to how we might interact with them on the internet. My focus will be, the context is aquariums, and I'll come back to that at the end. That is public aquariums, of which there's 185 plus in the United States, and over 70 countries around the world also have aquariums. So they're quite numerous and widespread. Some of the concepts would also apply to captive private aquariums in the home. And these examples come from my 2016 book, What a Fish Knows. Archer fishes are something that they do that's really cool is they squirt water at insects either perched above the water or flying by, and they use different techniques to catch them. This makes them ideally suited to studies in which you can present them with overhead panels, such as the panel on the right here. This was, and they will squirt accurately. These are touch-sensitive panels, and they will squirt accurately to, for instance, show that they recognize a familiar face. You can present them with 40 unfamiliar faces and 1 familiar face above the tank, and they will squirt at the 1 familiar face if they've been trained to do that, even if they lack hair and ears. What's that? Problem with that? The fishes will also interact with underwater panels, and as was used in this study, showing that fishes fall for the same optical illusions that we do. A fish who has learned to poke their nose against the larger of 2 circles, for instance, will in this instance poke the nose against the right circle rather than the left one, fooled by the Ebbinghaus illusion where the one on the right looks bigger when in fact they're the same size. I think there's something poignant about animals falling for optical illusions. It shows that they can have beliefs and that those beliefs can be fallible. Fishes will interact with mirrors, as was shown in a recent published study of mirror self-recognition by the blue-striped cleaner wrasse. This wrasse is looking in a mirror. If you put a colored gel dot on a part of the fish that the fish can't can only see in a reflection, they will then go and try to remove, they will move in such a way they can see the dot, and then they will go and try and remove it, perhaps by rubbing themselves against the gravel at the bottom of the tank. Fishes will interact with fake models, such as this moray eel on the left. This is a laminated moray eel, not a real one. And at these studies at the University of Cambridge, they did that so that they could control the movement of the moray eel with pulleys. And the grouper on the right is, you may not know this, but they actually have a referential signal. They recruit moray eels on the reef to forage with them. And through collaborative foraging, they're able to catch more fish together than if they hunt alone. Anecdotally, fishes will interact with an air stone. They'll actually ride the bubbles. This has been observed in a number of different occasions. And they'll swim around the tank and come back and ride up the bubbles again. It looks like perhaps play, perhaps a way to relieve the boredom of being confined to a boring, unstimulating tank. As with this sole, this individually tanked or housed, I don't know what the right word is there, cichlid, in a published study of play in fish, They interacted with idiosyncratically, each one indifferently, with this semi-buoyant thermometer. One of them would bump it around until it got it into the corner and would bully it there in the corner, repeatedly bumping it. And this is probably a way to relieve boredom, the boredom of captivity and being housed alone. Fishes are aware of what's going on the other side of the glass, and they will interact. Pufferfish with their binocular eyes at the front are particularly compelling in this regard. This is a 9-year-old pufferfish named Mango. That's the one on the left. And Mango would show sort of what looks like to us like delight and certainly interest when his human companion would come home from work at the end of the day. And there's lots of anecdotal accounts of fishes playing games, running back and forth behind the tank, and things like that. And also people putting their hands in the tank and the fish swimming into the hands and being stroked. Very interactive creatures, much more than we think. Speaking of being stroked, wild fishes such as this Nassau grouper will swim up to trusted human divers to receive a pet and a stroke, as will sharks, and they get into a state of hyper-relaxation. We call the jargon term is tonic immobility. I like to call it hyper-relaxation. I think they are enjoying the pleasure of the touch. And these sharks know these divers. They're long-term relationships. And this is relevant to one of the most well-studied mutualisms in nature, the cleaner-client relationship on the reef. Here we have two blue-striped cleaner wrasses swimming in and out of this so-called client fish. And this is a trade-off of benefits where the parasites removed by the cleaner fish are food for them. And so the client gets a spa treatment and a parasite removal service, and the cleaners get food. But sometimes the cleaners don't do such a great job of it. That can piss off the clients. And one of the ways that the cleaners curry favor and hopefully improve their image to other clients in the queue is to take breaks from parasite removal and literally massage them with gentle caresses with their pectoral fins, presumably as a way to make the clients want to come back again in future rather than taking their business elsewhere. And this is a relevant study in which a team from the University of Lisbon presented stressed surgeonfishes, sorry, I went the wrong button. Stressed surgeonfishes who'd been captured from the Great Barrier Reef. If they were put in a tank with a moving model, realistic model of a cleaner wrasse that could deliver caresses because it was attached to a motor, these individuals would swim up to and rub against that moving model an average of 15 times an hour and get caressed. And their stress levels measured by blood cortisol came down to baseline very quickly. Ones that were in a control tank where the model didn't move ignored it, 0 visits per hour as opposed to 15 visits per hour. So fishes will use caresses as a way to relieve stress. Tool use is also documented in fish such as this tuskfish who has blown water on the sand to uncover a mollusk and then proceeds to smash it against the rock. Lastly, fishes will interact with and will feed themselves if given the opportunity. In this captive situation, young cod could pull this string up here to cause food pellets to drop. As an aside, some of these cods actually learn to hook the string over a plastic marking tag, identifier tag on their backs. It allowed them to get slightly quicker to the food. So that was an example of innovation in a fish. But as you can see, just collectively, fishes are very alert, aware, intelligent, and interactive with their environments, which creates all kinds of potential for interacting with perhaps internet browsers. Touchscreen panels, just some examples, mirrors, these all touch on the things that I presented. Semi-buoyant toys, bubble stations, you could have caressing stations. I like the idea of that. I wish I had one in my home. Sand with hidden prey. And lastly, food treat stations. I put a question mark there because, of course, there is the caveat that we don't want to overfeed them. That's a major issue. But 1 minute, perfect, thank you. So we could have webcams set up in these aquarium situations in the station where, for instance, they could come to get caressed or get fed. And there'd be an internet interface. And then perhaps browsers could pay to play where they actually make a donation. I'm not a big supporter of commercial aquariums, but fishes are there, like it or not, and their lives could be made more stimulating by, for instance, having someone who could make a donation and cause a light to switch on. Fish could swim over to pull a string and get fed. And the user could see that and could appreciate that fishes are intelligent, responsive, that they learn by observation, which is well documented. So this is a way, I like to think of it as a win-win. And you could have interpretive science to support this. A win-win, not only is the quality of life for the captive fishes improved by stimulation and something interesting to do, but the public is educated about the intelligence of fish at the same time. Thank you very much.
Right on time. So our next speaker is Alison Cronin, who is the American Director of Monkey World in Dorset. So, Alison, talk.
Start by telling you a little bit about Monkey World. We are a primate rescue center. We assist governments around the globe to stop the smuggling, abuse, or neglect of primates that have mostly been stolen from the wild following either the bushmeat trade or the black market trade. As you can see, this is just an example from the last 2 years. Already in this year, I've got another sort of whole poster lined up of all of the new arrivals at the park. So you can see the diversity of primates that we're collecting from around the globe and from quite bizarre circumstances. There's still a huge illegal black market trade in chimpanzees as well as other primates. We rescue them from the biomedical industry, from the pet trade, from the entertainment industries. Most of them are stolen as youngsters from the wild, and then the babies are trained or kept as pets, as unofficial human beings. And it's quite interesting and ironic that in all of these circumstances, almost all of our chimpanzees at the park, and I now have 54 chimps at the park, have suffered being treated as unofficial human beings in one form or another. At the park, we rehabilitate our primates into large natural living groups as best we can, with large outdoor enclosures and large indoor areas so that they can live as a group. So those 54 chimps that I referred to live in 4 distinct groups at the park. Ananya's group, we've got a bachelor group of chimpanzees, a group of 19 run by Bart, and a group of 5 that are sort of a bit more disabled and special needs. Right, we do a lot of interaction with our chimpanzees. They aren't returning to the wild. Sanctuaries in the wild are overburdened already. So a lot of their medical care we do by cooperative operant conditioning. And in some instances, it can be quite severe, such as a morbidly obese orangutan that was part of the black market pet trade in South Africa. We trained Oshin to sit on a scale, and through just natural diet and activity, she slimmed down quite a lot. A type 1 diabetic chimpanzee at the park, Bart. We've trained him within a few short weeks. His condition deteriorated quite rapidly, and we trained him very quickly, not only to let us take pinprick samples from fingers, toes, all over his body in order to test his glucose, but then to take his insulin injections. And within about 6 months, you can see Bart returned to his normal rip stature, and we're very pleased with that because it saved his life. That first time we had him down with the veterinarians, they wanted to put him down. I had faith in our team and our abilities to interact with our chimps and communicate well enough with them that we would give it a go, and that was 2 veterinarians that I had to argue with. By choice, in our large enclosures, a lot of our primates interact with our visitors. We're entirely self-funded, so we have a fair number of tourists that come through the park. And because of the background of a lot of our guys, they actually really enjoy and appreciate interacting with people. So, in terms of the interspecies internet, I come from it from a very different angle. I'm not really interested in language acquisition or trying to have our primates communicate with us on our terms, but the opposite direction. We already have a lot of 100 cameras installed in our houses that are high-definition CCTV cameras. We do a lot of filming of the work we do, and we have a television series that follows the lives of our rescued primates. So we use a lot of this footage already. You can see the diagram of this house up there and how it relates. One of these playrooms is one of those squares along on the inside. The chimps are very loud and volatile, and in those 4 groups of chimpanzees at the park, they're already communicating across the park with each other. And it's always interesting when something's happening in one group, you know that the others are knowing and understanding a fair amount of what's going on. Even myself, with limited chimpanzee abilities, sat at my desk, I can tell which individual in this group has started the fight. I can recognize their voices. And it led me on to considering the next, talking to Peter and doing something with the Interspecies Internet that would perhaps benefit our rescued primates. And that's where we got started, and I sort of called it the Max Headroom experiment, not point one. And that was, we have a few clips that I'll show you quickly. Hopefully I'll get through them. So in terms of engaging, we set up a FaceTime situation from my desk in my office down to one of our chimpanzee groups. We just put up a screen in the kitchen window. And you can see Brian was across the room. I called him over, and they were happy to come and engage with me on a flat screen through the glass. Sorry. Yeah, no, I've known all of these guys for quite a long time, so they are interested in playing with me. So being greeted, that's Sally greeting me through the glass. If I'm walking through the park, she always comes up and puts an ear up for me to give a nice gentle pat. There's a few technology problems I'll come to on troubleshooting, but it was really interesting that they were prepared to greet me on the flat screen. Full frontal presentation from Rodders there to say hello and hi and acknowledge me.
Smell-o-vision here.
Once again, a full side-on presentation. I started making grooming noises and putting my hand out to him, and you can see he's starting to lean forward, but the flat screen isn't going to really achieve that much. So then we went on to sort of food sharing. I'm eating bananas, strawberries, whatever. Thought I'd sort of just consider if we could make the link between what's happening with me in the office. They show some interest. I radioed my guy down in the house. If I'm eating a banana, we'll hand out some bananas to them and see if we can make that connection and that link more to what's going on. Interestingly enough, the engagement that we're happening in here, there's a group of 5 chimpanzees in this group. It was really only the boys who really wanted to sit and engage with me. The ladies came over. I got a nice hello from Sally, but then, that's all right. No, don't need to go there. And then playing. Once again, the young guys. Really, Rodders just lost the plot. I used to play with Rodders quite a lot. He's starting to get a little bit big for that. But all he wanted to do was to play with me and have silly games. The play developed. We had several different games going. can see the open mouth play face there. He's right up against the screen. If he could have crawled through, he would. Need a deeper voice.
Watch your language.
Okay. Just one more. Just one more. Hang on. So just going on to the troubleshooting, and then I will leave. Promise. So the problems that we encountered were right here. You can see Sally comes to say hello to me. The audio that we had, because it was through the glass, we put speakers in from up above. The audio wasn't synced with the computer screen. Technology-wise, the angle of the cameras weren't good enough for the short stature of the chimpanzee. I can't see from the top of the screen a full-size image. We need to use full-size image screens for the chimps to properly engage with us, but the height of the cameras and the angle of them aren't right on the computers. So that's a problem. So right now I've got Sally and Rogers engaging with me. I can only see Brian from across the room, who I just beckon over, give him a call, and he comes right over to me. But I'm ignoring Sally and Rogers, which is just rude. So it's a little bit of a problem with that. Okay. Thank you.
How do you say thank you in chimpanzee?
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah.
You don't know that word. Okay.
I'd embrace you, but yeah.
Okay, so next speaker is Linwood Pendleton, who's Senior Fellow of Ocean and Coastal Policy at Duke University Nicholas Institute.
No, that's old. That's old. I'll tell you later.
Okay.
I have 3 jobs now, but I'm only going to talk about one. I'm not here as a speaker, so I don't have a presentation. I'm here as a listener, because if you think back to Britt's presentation, that depressing first 2 or 3 minutes of it, about all the extinctions we face, my job is as the global lead for ocean science at World Wildlife Fund. So my job is to prevent that from happening, at least in the ocean space. And that's a really tough job, because while we've had a lot of wins in conservation, and conservation science has really improved over the last few decades, it's clear that we're not winning, we're not keeping up, because we are hurtling towards the 6th great extinction event, looking at 1,000 species that are going to go extinct in our lifetime. And marine mammals, marine megafauna, are among those species. At least 1/3 of marine mammals are considered endangered or threatened. About half of all whales are very poorly known. We can't even tell you if their population is increasing or decreasing. And while we've done a lot to do things like reduce whale hunting, not to 0, but we've reduced it tremendously, each year 300,000 to 500,000 whales die in fishing gear. I mean, it's really hard to get that, whales and dolphins, hard to get your head around something of that magnitude. We don't even have any idea how many whales are dying due to ship strikes, largely because when a whale is hit by a ship, it sinks. It only returns to the surface once it bloats, and it could be 100 kilometers from where it was hit. And this is the problem. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going on. And this is true of most marine megafauna. While we've done a much better job of learning about the terrestrial biosphere, when it comes to the biosphere, especially wildlife in the sea, we're still largely ignorant. For these big marine wildlife organisms, we don't know where they are most of the time. They're underwater. We don't know their migratory routes, and it's only in the past couple of years that we've started realizing that the whales that winter together are not the same as the whales that summer together. They're going to completely different places. And we know this now because we have environmental DNA that lets us start to crack this nut. But really, we don't know where they are between winter and summer, between feeding and breeding. It's a guessing game. We have these incredible corridors where whales migrate from the Arctic to the Galapagos and from the Antarctic up to Peru. and we don't know what's going on. We don't know how their distribution is changing. We don't know why it's changing. And what we say in the conservation business is, if you can't measure it, you can't model it, you can't manage it. And so that's where we find ourselves with a lot of these big marine animals. But we're getting better. And my lab works on, for instance, using machine learning to try to understand where whales are by looking through very high-resolution satellite images and also not so high-resolution satellite images. And what we've been able to do is find these things, find whales. You can't see it with your eyes, but I don't know if you heard about the beluga whales that were trapped in Russia in what National Geographic called icy prisons waiting to be exported to marine parks. We found those whales using Google Earth images. You couldn't have recognized those whales with your eyes, and you certainly couldn't have told the difference between those whales and little icebergs that look to be about the same, but the machine can, because we have very good pictures that we could train the machine with. So we've started doing a better job of things like looking for animals, but it's just scratching the surface. And we haven't organized this data. It's everywhere, and it's not organized in a way that's really meaningful for conservation. And the same thing, I think, is true of acoustic information. We now have lots and lots of acoustic information about marine mammals and other kinds of animals, but it's not organized in a way where we can get to it and start analyzing it. And I think that's what Britt was talking about this morning when he talked about whale X. But we are starting to use these hydrophones and do a better job of at least knowing where whales are. But there's so much more we can do with this information. And Roger started talking about it a little bit this morning, and then Asa and Britt talked more about how we could do this in nature. But we should be able to ask marine mammals, where have you been? Where are you going? What are the threats you face? How have they changed? What's happening with the food? What's happening with climate around you and water temperature? And we should be able to ask them about other species. What do you eat? How is that changing? What about what eats you? We know that predator-prey relationships are making a big impact. As climate changes, their predators are moving, like orca are moving north, and they're starting to eat narwhals. We need to know from the narwhals where the orca coming from. And then if we could crack this problem of interspecies communication, what could we communicate to marine wildlife? What could we tell them about where we are? Because that's largely the problem. You know, people don't want to catch whales in their fishing gear, and ships don't want to hit whales because it damages your ship, damages your net. But how do we communicate this to whales? Conservation has been slow to use technology, but we've been doing better and better. But really, we're stuck in the 20th century when it comes to a lot of wildlife, which is we're still focused on the visual, looking for animals. And when we think about how we've used technology, it's mostly to improve the way we look for animals, camera traps, drones, things like that. Or to automate repetitive tasks. But I think Asa and Britt were both really convincing that we need to use technology now to find other ways of knowing about the biosphere. So for instance, sharks and rays use electromagnetic radiation to figure out where fish and prey are. But we don't use electromagnetic monitoring at all to understand how the biosphere is doing. And nature makes sound, sometimes intentional, sometimes it's not intentional. If you've been scuba diving on a coral reef, you know it's just a cacophonous symphony of sounds, pops and clicks, not necessarily communication, but we need to be able to grab that sound and see if we can use it to understand how biodiversity is changing. Well, for me, this idea of interspecific communication is just one other way of knowing about the biosphere and how it's changing. We've got to find new ways of understanding the world around us, because if we do not find big leaps, big changes in the way we measure and monitor the biosphere, we're never going to save it. Okay. So I want to just spend my last minute talking about the biggest threat to moving forward with communications with whales and things in the ocean, and that's the problem of ocean noise. The sound of the ocean has increased 10 decibels since 1970, which means it's going to be virtually impossible for us to communicate with whales if we're going to do it orally. But it's impossible or more and more difficult and will one day be impossible for them to communicate intraspecies. So that means they're not going to be able to pass on information within a generation about where the food is and where the threats are. They're not going to be able to reconnect mothers and calves. And they're not going to be able to pass information down from generation to generation. So I'm hopeful because I think technology is the key to both of these problems, cracking the interspecies communication problem and also solving noise.
Very thought-provoking. So our next speaker is Sarah Elizabeth, is it Byosiere? Okay, she's the director of the Thinking Dog Center at CCNY.
All right. Today I'm just going to talk a little bit about dogs. I work at a dog center where we ask New York City dog owners to bring in their dogs, and we play problem solving and cognitive games with them. But the research that I'm going to talk about today is when we created, in a sense, a screen that the dogs could interact with. And I think that this has broader implications for what you could do with your pet at home, but also has various research functions. If you have a dog, you might have noticed that when you go out on the street, you get flocked by lots and lots of people who want to come and pet your dog. We have this love for approaching people who have dogs, and we've actually seen that now there's an uptick in the amount of dogs we have in US homes. There's about almost 90 million pet dogs in the US. And these dogs play a huge role in our daily lives, not only as companions, they love to give us cuddles and provide us with endless hours of entertainment, but they also have various working roles, so in service role functions and also detection, protection functions. So why dogs? Dogs are actually very highly sensitive to human-given communicative gestures. They like to follow our pointing and our gaze. They're very good at doing this. And in a sense, uniquely so. Not a lot of other species are so in tune to following these kinds of human social cues. And because of this, we've actually seen a dramatic increase in both cognitive and behavioral studies in the last 20 years. Dog cognition as a research field is actually relatively new, but so far we've seen a massive boom. And one of the really cool things is that we've seen human-designed technologies be applied or have dogs trained to work with them in some way. So for example, dogs have now been trained to go into fMRI machines, and we have very cool brain scans, and we can actually present them with stimuli and see what's going on and how they respond to them. We can track their eye movements when they're looking at videos of birds flying across screens. So there's a lot of applied purposes here that can be both helpful for us as researchers, but also in figuring out what our furry friends know. So I'm going to talk about what we call the canine nose touch apparatus. This is what we term it in our papers. It's actually called unofficially the Ronatron, because we named it after my PhD supervisor's partner, Ron, who helped put this all together with his creative handiwork skills. And basically what you have here is a box. What you're looking at, the little square bit, is a door that opens. And so when a dog comes in for testing, we open the door, they can run down the tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel, there's a screen. The idea here was that the box could eliminate experimenter cues, because if they are so attuned to our communicative gestures, we wouldn't want to influence them to make a choice in a certain way. Cool thing is that if you want to do this at home, you really just need a screen. So you can get an iPad, you can find an old computer monitor, set up PowerPoint, put some things on it. Every time they touch it, reward them for it, and you can start to do some science at home. So this process, in terms of training a dog to do various things with a screen, actually takes some time. When we first started, it took about 8 months to train 13 dogs to do a size discrimination task. So basically, tell me which of these two circles is either larger or smaller. We found out that there was a learning curve for the humans involved in this, and now we can do it in about 2 months, which is way better. But what this looks like is we begin by shaping the behavior. So this is a dog, every time they touch the little red palm, they get rewarded. So we train them to touch things. Then what we do next is actually training them to go into the tunnel. So if you're a dog, you can imagine that going down a big, dark, scary tunnel and you have no idea what's at the end of it may not be a super fun thing for you to do. So actually getting the dogs to go down to the tunnel to realize that there is something down there for them to touch is a process. So we have to work on integrating these two steps together. Once they do this, we have to teach them something. So for our purposes, this was tell me what is larger, tell me what is smaller. So in stage 3, we have Daisy. She's just learning, so you'll hear lots of coaxing, lots of noises. She's trying to get used to the box. And here she's trained to select the smaller, so she should be going always for the smaller circle. And she does, and she gets rewarded. But it takes her some time. She has to realize she has to come out, she has to go back in. Now she's confused. She's pretty good at this game. And I think here you'll see that when we're training them, she accidentally touched the larger one. The stimuli still stay on the screen. She's still learning. But if this was a real trial, she would have just gotten it marked wrong and she wouldn't get rewarded for it. And so this is just a fun example of what we've actually been able to do with this kind of research. So this is Lulu and Eliza doing a discrimination task with circles, which they're very good at. They can do it for different size comparisons. And then we decided, what happens if we give them something new? So if we give you stars, how do you react? And a little bit slower, but she's got it. Same thing with Eliza, very, very speedy. These guys are trained to select the larger. Very fast. And her reaction is the best, I think. She thinks there's a catch. Ooh. This one. So what have we done with this? We've actually looked at dogs' sensitivities to different sizes, what they can discriminate in terms of percent size differences between objects, concept generalization, like what we've shown here, and most interesting, at least for me, whether or not dogs are susceptible to visual geometric illusions. And we've done a whole bunch of illusions, the Ponzo, the Ebbinghaus, Knizia, and that's been relatively fun. So in thinking about using this type of technology for dogs, or at least getting them to interact with screens, we can use it as a technological tool, just like I've shown you today, and there are other examples with dogs, some of which also have applied benefits in the home. So these researchers, Ziegler et al., came up with a system where dogs could be trained to, in a sense, call 911 by touching numbers on a screen. The cool thing is that if you tell the dog a certain command, that means go call this number, they can go ahead and do that, which might be really helpful for someone who needs assistance in the home or may not have someone living with them. But then there's also really fun things you can do. So this could just be enriching. It could help with training. And so actually we have here a treat and train, which is the operated dispenser that we use, but you can do a whole bunch of different things with it. Once they start to follow the little red palm, you can get them to do a whole variety of different tricks. And now there are cool tech pet market toys like this, the Clever Pet, which is all the way in the corner. And these are more marketed for things that your pet can do at home while you're away, so makes us feel better as pet owners. But they have cool algorithms that train the dogs and kind of adapt to the dog's level. So if your dog is struggling with a certain task, it'll mediate it. If the dog is really successful at it, it will become more difficult, which is very, very intriguing. One of the things that we do need to keep in mind, though, is that there are morphological and behavioral differences. So we like using screens. We are very visual. Dogs, they use the screens, but potentially are not as visual of a species as we are. They love using their noses. The noses are very, very good. So when we're coming up with systems for them to use and interact with, if they're not using them, it may just be that it's not useful or entertaining for them. So we have to keep this in mind and come up with interesting and cool ways that make sense for them to use. We had one dog that every time he ran in and booped the screen, he would basically smash the front of his nose against it and kind of smear it all around. And it wasn't necessary, just a gentle touch works as well, but I often had welfare concerns about his senses after that. And with that, I'd just like to thank Dr. Bennett and the dogs for being such good sports and participating in a variety of experiments, and also all of the individuals who helped create this apparatus and put all this together, and the Thinking Dog Center and the ABC program at Hunter. They've been very supportive. Thank you. I planned it.
Our next speaker is Itai Roffman, who is at the Institute of Evolution at Haifa University. You here?
College, I moved.
Oh, you moved. Okay,
Israel
well, then
Valley
you can explain to where you went. So much for information on the internet. You can't trust it at all.
No,
Who invented that thing anyway?
Oh, PowerPoint, thanks. I'm very honored to participate in your amazing vision. And it really is a proposal that I've presented to you here. And the people involved, you can see Dr. Sue Savage-Rumbaugh and Dr. Francine Patterson across the years together with us. And now when we're going into the title, I need the, yeah. Oh, the color is okay, that's my color. Oh, yeah. The title of the proposal, sorry. The title of our proposal is to establish an internet communication between hominins, which are chimpanzees and humans and hominids, the other great apes, gorillas, and orangutans, as a therapeutic method for improving the emotional and cognitive, social, and cultural capabilities of youth with autism. And here is an example of how important visual impression has a profound effect on the human brain and other species' brain. It may lead to a burst of creativity just to see this image, or it can result in a long-lasting uncertainty that excites the imagination. And let's illustrate this. Here is a painting by Johannes Vermeer from 1658, and the Nobel Prize laureate Wisława Szymborska wrote her impression of this painting. And what she has said is, in the poem, as long as the woman from the Rijksmuseum in painted silence and concentration day after day pours milk from the jug to the bowl, the world does not deserve the end of the world. So that's the power of the image. Here's another power of an image. This is a film of an unknown hominid at Bluff Creek, California, USA, 1967, taken by Patterson and Gimlin. This is a visual documentation that created a big controversy about its authenticity, and the debate still goes on. However, in our field site that we established in Mali, West Africa, we found endemic chimpanzees at our field site and at the National Zoo of Mali exhibiting similar bipedal gait. 50% of the time, this is Samba, walks on two legs. He lives in Mali. This is at the sanctuary we established for him at the National Zoo there. This characteristic from the sanctuary is awaiting now corroboration from the wild, which can be achieved via internet communication from our research sites in Mali and the envisioned interhominin or interhominid internet communication center at Israel Valley College, Israel, which is where we still are in Haifa, but we moved to this college because they gave us the center. And this is the proposal. This is the interhominin or interhominid internet communication center at the Israel Valley College for the benefit of all hominids and hominins. And this is the following chart that describes the activity for youth with communicational disabilities like autism and medium retardation. So we've got the youth, and we have already rooms prepared for them. The envision idea is to show them great ape videos of language competent gorillas, American Sign Language, language competent chimpanzees, and bonobos in English with Dr. Sue Savage-Rumbaugh. And these videos that they will see In a moment, you will see the implications. Now, we also want there to be active video of live internet communication using 3 dimensions, holographic images, hologrammic images with augmented reality applications between great apes in zoos and in sanctuaries so they can communicate with each other, so they can develop language, because chimpanzees in captivity and gorillas in captivity today and orangutans have lost the ability to speak because they've disconnected the ties with their elders, with their parents. And with this internet program, our dream is that we can rehabilitate culturally, psychologically, the welfare and the culture of the great apes. And the children, communicational disability, who in a minute you'll see why it's so important. This is the view of our college. Here is Samba, our best friend in the Mali sanctuary. Just like humans in captive settings, chimpanzees in captivity suffer from a variety of mental pathologies. In the process of psychological and cultural rehabilitation, chimpanzees in zoos and sanctuaries should have internet access to their conspecifics, and what we relate to here is also to gorillas and to orangutans. We just took an example from our programs in Mali, so that they can converse with each other, so that they can fulfill their hominin and hominin potentials as being members of our extended human family. And this is and they can gain control over their lives through this. They can rehabilitate their cultural diversity, which we discovered that chimpanzee had with the support of my mentor, Dr. Jane Goodall, across the years. And we've published last month a manifesto which is called Chimpanzee Survival and Bonobo Survival in the 21st Century for Chimpanzee Cultural Preservation, Rehabilitation, and Emancipation. Manifesto is published in Human Evolution. Now, we can bring the internet technology into the field with the tribal communities that we work with in Mali, and we've expanded now to Burundi and Tanzania. Now, with bringing internet technology to the field, it should constitute a good program for nature conservation and preservation of the tribal cultural heritage of the indigenous people that have, you can see here a picture from Kula Balunda from our chimpanzee field site. This is one of the children who's drawn on a piece of cardboard the chimpanzee that they lived next to. And you can see that with our program, we can, for example, elders who've we've interviewed for our testimony program to show how chimpanzees and humans are sister species, and that chimpanzee in the local languages mean man of the forest or man of the cliffs. And we have taken these documentation of elders who have passed away, and with their stories, the stories are gone now. But on screen, we can take into these tribal communities through internet, through these big screens, we can bring back their elders that remember the time 60, 70 years ago when they lived in peace with chimpanzees, and teach the young generations of their long-lost tribal traditions. So we have the project called Bring Back the Masks and Body Paints and Conversations with Brother Chimpanzee, or now in the future we'll want to do conversations with cousin gorilla and cousin orangutan and expand through there. And this is the communication building at Israel Valley College, where we have received space to conduct. You can see at the bottom there's a two-sided mirror that we can have children documenting how they see videos and how they see live stream of chimpanzees at the Interhominin Internet Communication Center that we are now with here, trying to envision with you how to take this off the ground in the immediate future. Now, this is an hypothesis that here is an hypothesis for the chimpanzees, but it goes for the same way in a moment you will see with gorillas and orangutans and bonobos. So with chimpanzees and bonobos, they share over 99% genetic identity with humans. They can trigger in communicationally disabled youth the expression of their hidden emotional and mental potential of these youth. And the relaxing atmosphere that you see here with Kanzi on the three-dimensional screen of this Snozeland-type internet communication room, the children are there. They can stay there through sleep time or dream time. They can see the videos of Kanzi and Pambanisha, and we have support, and Coco and Michael, we have supporting evidence for this. A wild chimpanzees found Bello. This is Bello on the left, a mentally disabled baby. He was abandoned by his parents in Kano, Nigeria. West Africa. He was raised by chimpanzees. He had a severe mental disability. The chimpanzees raised him for over 2 years, thus enabling his rehabilitation. So his parents abandoned him in the forest. The chimpanzees took a mentally disabled baby and rehabilitated him up to the age of 3 until hunters came in, took him back to the city, but he passed away, couldn't live without the chimps. Dr. Don Prince Hughes, diagnosed with Asperger's, acquired interpersonal emotional communication skills from observing and exchanging information with captive gorillas. My brother, born in Maryland with mental disabilities and diagnosed with medium retardation and autism. As an adolescent, he learned to draw figuratively and developed speech after learning pantomime, as he was at the age of 15, 16 years of age, closely observing videos that Dr. Francine Penny Patterson sent to us and Dr. Susava Drumba of the language-competent bonobo chimpanzees Kanzi and Pambanisha and American Sign Language speaking videos of Coco and Michael. And this is Orr's development of drawing, of stages of his evolution from scribble to iconic representation just from watching Coco and Michael, Kanzi and Pambanisha, for several months when he was 14. He didn't have language until then. He developed from just watching Pambanisha and Kanzi drawing on the floor with chalk, their lexicograms, and Michael and Coco communicating in sign language. But first, you can see scribble with formative component. After a few weeks, it moved on to geometric components lacking a defined form. After a couple of months, figurative drawing with defined characteristics. After a few months, three-dimensional figurative imagery. Drawings based on photographs. This is Nyota, baby Nyota, Pambanisha's son, on the left. You can see my interpretation of baby Nyota with a pink ball and my brother's interpretation of Nyota with the pink ball. After several months, Kanzi, he drew Kanzi, and then he drew Matata, and then he drew Alikia. We are going into the history of art just by observing chimpanzees and gorillas. My master's was based on this research from 2002 to 2003, and this is an image from Kanzi, how he painted a peace dove in the center in purple, using the same methodology that Orr, my brother, used to draw and to develop figurative iconography. And the method was drawing on paper from photograph or image. And then this was the basis of my master's thesis, and after that, my PhD dissertation, proving that language-competent bonobos have representational mark-making competencies and can remember their respective meanings across time in standardized testing. And you could see the peace dove that I drew for Kanzi at the top left and the other purple peace dove on the floor that we had next to me. And this is what Kanzi drew in the whole thesis. And you could see all the different animals, objects, and chimpanzees that they drew. We're getting near the end. Michael, the gorilla, ASL competent in sign language, named it Me, Myself, Good. And my brother Orr pointed out that Michael, who drew on this painting, he made a self-portrait of himself. And I drew with the black contours to show that Michael was actually drawing himself, and he saw himself as a rainbow, and this is what he drew. And the last thing is, Orr grew up to become a very charming young man with highly developed emotional intelligence. He has many friends at his hostel and outside it. He engages in arts and sports, speaks short, rational sentences of 3 to 5 words, and works at a rehabilitation employment center. And he has been admitted to military service and special work. So I really want to say that he often wants to speak with Kanzi. And I really want to give you this image that I drew of Shoshi, the chimpanzee from the Tel Aviv Safari Park. I think it really shows how we need to treat our sister species and cousin species of the gorillas, orangutans, chimpanzees, and bonobos, because they have to teach us so much about cultural diversity that we've only scratched the surface. And through this program of interspecies communication and internet, we can achieve amazing things. Thank you so much.
I love stories like that. Okay, so our last speaker in this session is Paul Thibault, who's a professor of linguistics and media communications at Agder University in Norway.
That's right. Yeah. question, technical, about the videos. Okay, but how do they run? Do they have to do them manually?
You keep clicking and then you cross your fingers.
Okay, where do I click?
You can use the big green button.
Right, okay, and that'll remove the slides on? Yes. Okay, thanks. Okay, I won't say anything about myself except to say that, well, first of all, thank you for the people who made it possible for me to journey from Sydney, Australia to here last night. I won't say anything about the phenomenon of jet lag. I think what I want to do here is conversations I started going back some years now with Sue Savage-Rumbaugh made it very clear that we need to rethink in many ways, develop new perspectives on what I will call languaging rather than language. And you'll see why when I get into the presentation. And this has implications both for humans and bonobos. Okay, so my focus will be on that nexus between the two species. Okay, so I'll start in this way. Well, actually, I've got a little outline. I want to talk about the idea of full-bodied sense-making of living animate bodies, okay, and ideas of agency and skillment, and what I'll call multimodal languaging rather than language, okay. And out of that, I'll say a little bit about scaffolding in relationship to coordination and the development of enskillment. And a quick look at bonobo human, the same clip we saw earlier, the groom song, and I'll talk about that in terms of developing intertwined trajectories of movement, growth, and becoming. Okay, in this case between Panbanisha and Peter, yeah. And I'll talk about the idea of affective openness and self-expression, opening the gateway to the interspecies, interworld, as I will call it. Okay, and then a few concluding remarks. Now, I hope the button works. All right, first thing is the idea of the sense-making. Let's just say that all living beings have a long history, humans and other living beings have a long history of relating and engaging with each other and taking part in all sorts of joint activities. And of course, that's why we're here in many ways. So engagement is what I'll call full-bodied sense-making that enables these different beings to perceive aspects of each other's worlds and to turn what they notice or help others to notice as a means of growing, developing, and so on. So every life, if you like, is tasked with bringing other lives into being. Okay, and I think that's something we need to think about a lot. And I think that's very, very deeply implicit in many of the things I've heard people say today. So engagement between, say, humans and bonobos is grounded in, first of all, biological agency, but biological agency gives rise to all sorts of forms of social agency, co-agency, and so on. Okay, and the diverse modes of interspecies relationality, along with the potential for creating the scaffolds that enable, what we hope will enable the virtual interspecies internet. Right. Okay, so, but basically, the idea of the sense-making body, whole-body sense-making, is grounded in the animacy of the living body. Okay. Human life, animal life is full of animacy, drama, performance, body displays, facial displays, gesture, gaze, posture, vocalizing, and lots of other things indicate desires, feelings, and intentions, and so on. And these animate displays not only attract attention, but they also engage others and affect them. So there's the idea of affect, affecting, having the capacity to affect, and having the capacity to be affected. So that kind of capacity, which is reciprocal, enables the co-construction of events and anticipated futures. So we get this dialogical looping, okay, building up. And dialogical looping enables an agent, a self, say, bonobo or human, to begin the process of transcending the bodily, okay, and see things from another's perspective, okay, and that's fundamental to any kind of dialogical process. And you get what I will call here a radical betweenness of dialogic co-construction of an interworld, okay, which results from the co-engagement of the two or more agents. Right, so, oh, right, okay. All right, just a little clip there. So a few things I'll say here about the animacy of the living body. Right, hang on. I'm not used to this clicking system. Right, okay. Anyway, that was a, can I go back a minute? Yeah, okay. Right, okay, thanks. It's all right, okay. Anyway, so far, before I get to the next slide, that is the one after this one, where I'll talk more specifically about why I distinguish language from languaging, let's just say that evolution and development are actually deeply intertwined. So that puts the focus back on agency and enskillment. Living beings, after all, actively contribute to and participate in their own evolution and development, including not only their own, but that of others as well. So living beings are the makers of their own and others' lives, okay, in the process, basically, of living together. All right, and that's all I'll say there about that before I move on to the next one. That's tough to read, that one. Okay, I won't try and read all that, but you see I've set up here a distinction between language. Goes back a number of millennia in the Western tradition, thinking of language as this system or code which pairs forms with meanings, okay, and that code is in some way the guarantor of linguistic communication between people. But we really need to move to something more, and this is starting to happen, a lot of developments across a number of disciplines in the last couple of decades are making this shift possible. Language emerges developmentally in a relational dynamic, okay, of family, social group, etc. Attunement to the other, or mutual attunement, is critical. Variability, okay, is the norm. Interactivity between individuals with diverse interaction histories and experiences, and the need to coordinate those experiences is really fundamental. Okay, so what I call the dialogic appropriation and entrenchment in memory of diverse bodily and artifactual resources gives rise to habitual and increasingly habitual and conventionalized routines for interacting. And if you think of the bonobo human interworld that Sue created over many years, as a key example here, it gives rise to opportunities for languaging to emerge. Okay, so it's not something. Language is not something we acquire, but it emerges through all sorts of processes of this kind. Okay, and fundamental to that are things like cooperative action, openness to engagement, affect, and relational dynamics, okay? And persons, I mean either bonobo or human, develop repertoires of languaging practices across diverse media and diverse semiotic modalities. Okay, another video here. I just click on it. Okay, think of this one. So there, Sue and it's Pan-Benicia, isn't it? And negotiating juice. Yeah, Pan-Benicia wants juice. Now, they're not sending messages to each other, decoding and encoding, decoding mental or other contents, in my view. They're learning to use that verbal or linguistic, in this case on the lexigram, but also in the talk, normatively, for example, to focus attention, to stabilize and attune to a fluctuating environment in flexible and adaptive ways, to manage coordination, to manage and anticipate the flow of their interactivity, because it's a process in time, okay, to differentiate and orient to the situation in appropriate ways, to enact and display selfhood, and I'll come back to that later if time allows, and in the process they're co-constructing an interworld. And they're also drawing on and developing together a whole array of techniques and forms of enskillment. Okay, Tim Ingold, the social anthropologist, talks about cultural enskillment, and I think that's really crucial here. That is techniques, okay, to get things done together in the process of living their life together, of moving along together. Okay. I'll have to ignore that. Reflect, if you think about, oh, it's gone. No. Must be the jet lag here, I'm not coordinating with the screen. Okay, think about what's going on. We don't have time to analyze it, but a huge amount of stuff's going on in that brief clip. Okay, languaging is skilled multimodal interactivity, developing repertoires of resources. Take the lexigram here. The lexigram is skilled multimodal activity in which body-environment enactment on the part of both agents here shapes the experiential dynamics of the situation in order to structure understanding. So it's not a process of sending a message. Okay, so attending to the images on the lexigram while manipulating them, touching them, looking at them, etc., generates meaningful experience in time and across time scales. Okay, so it gives structure to the situation and so on. I won't dwell on that slide, but just to give you the idea of what one kind of example of multimodal interactivity in action, as it were. Next one. Okay, I'm running out of time badly. Right. Basically, you have here a situation where languaging is playing a vital role in scaffolding the interactivity that's going on between the two agents. Okay, and scaffolding is much more than just one person imparting information they have to, say, the less expert other. It has other meta-level functions. For example, developing the ability to simplify tasks by focusing attention, the ability to make situationally appropriate differentiations, to facilitate action targeting, getting juice in this case, and the ability to project what's learned into future situations. So basically, Pan-Benicia here with Sue is learning a range of meta-level capacities and skills that are transferable. Okay. Yeah, I know. Okay, I'll have to. We'll just come to the last two slides. Okay, I've had to drop about 3 or 4 slides. Okay, I won't play the video clips here because of the time issue. But in both of these, as the one on the left is Pan-Benicia, and that's when she touches good at the end of the grooming song. And then the other one is with Kanzi while playing with Peter, and he asks for the room to be opened up so he can get together with everybody else because the musicians are in another room. Okay, what I want to emphasize here, get to the right slide, you see, I love what Patricia said earlier, that she talked about the crescendo there, the developing crescendo. And it's also a crescendo of affect, okay? And you can see there's obvious self-gratification that strengthens a sense of being together, that builds excitement, and also the self-consciousness of both Pan-Benicia and Kanzi displaying their skills while being attentive to and responding to what's going on with the others, that is, the other musicians. And if time allowed, I would have developed that in a preceding slide a bit more. So the bonobo self here, in both cases, feels, in one case herself, in the other case himself, to be part of a larger community. Okay, bonobo human interworld, I'll call it, in which the self has intrinsic value and purpose. And I'm going to skip, if I might, just one last slide. Okay, just want to say this. Emphasis on enskillment, such as intertwined tool use, technologies, and languaging, promote expertise through guided processes of attending to, observing, and discovering. Social bonding, both in languaging and in musicking, and in the two going together, as in the grooming song. Scaffold various capacities and skills. The development of personhood, because bonobos too have selfhood or personhood. Languaging enables the taking up and enacting of diverse points of view in the interworld. Sorry?
This is threatening behavior, in case you didn't notice.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate that. Okay, so let's see whether we can pick up some questions here, and I may need some help from you to pull the ones up because, well, let's see.
That's great.
Well, let's see. There's several here. I'm not sure who this belongs to. It says, will children be taught as effectively by a TV image compared to a real-life person? I don't know who that's aimed at.
It's Itai. That was
Is that you? Yes, okay. So,
I can answer that. In terms of what my brother taught me, he, together with my brother and Penny and Sue and Jane, they pushed us into this realm of bilateral informational exchange on a level that we thought was unique to only to humans. And when my brother was talking in 3 or 4 or 5 word sentences, I took that back to Kanzi and Panbanisha, and I wanted to ask Kanzi in nighttime when he was crying at night and he was in big trauma, why are you crying? Because I knew my brother could give information about that. So Kanzi told me, hose, hurt, Kanzi, and he gave information about something that happened years in the past, that a guard hit him with the metal side of the hose. So I believe that in terms of if you have a real live image of a chimpanzee on screen who can communicate with other chimpanzees, they can learn language from each other, just like it's enough for us to see a picture of a person who makes something out of extraordinary in terms of our culture, and then for chimpanzees to develop culture by seeing other chimpanzees make caveman-type stone tools. 1 second in a minute they do that. And in Mali, what we're doing is showing images of video of Kanzi and Panbanisha drawing figuratively, just like cave art from the Pyrenees. And now chimpanzees at the Mali Zoo watch them on screen and they're drawing. Right, just like that. So in this image, I think it can be video and it can be live stream, but that's what I said with the children whose grandparents passed away in the past couple of years, we can bring those grandparents on screen and they can say how years ago we knew the language of chimpanzees and they taught us the medicinal purposes of their plants.
thank you. So, Linwood, question for you. What's causing the ocean to become louder? How could it be 10 decibels louder?
So the increase in noise is primarily because of the increase in global shipping. So all the things you buy through Amazon, but it's also military activity, seismic testing, and then just underwater industrialization.
Here's a good one. If you could speak chimpanzee, would you be able to continue to interact with them as they grow larger, just as you can with humans who grow bigger?
Absolutely not. And for us at Monkey World, the main priority is to get them rehabilitated into groups of their own kind. There were a few questions there that all get wrapped up into one. The purpose of the project was not for me to FaceTime my chimpanzees, but it was the only way that we could get started, which is why I called it with Neil 0.1. It was within our existing facilities. The goal at Monkey World is never, ever to separate a chimpanzee from the family groups that we have rehabilitated them into. But as I was showing in the beginning, our chimpanzee groups communicate with each other across our park. What I'm hoping to be able to do, if we can get the hardware correct, is to link up the houses that our chimpanzees live in so that they can communicate together. And the first step was just to understand whether they would be engaged and involved emotionally as well as attentively to deal with a flat screen image, which clearly they were if they were prepared to deal with my lame backside on a screen in front of them. I know that they'll be interested now in rubbernecking, looking into the houses of the other chimps that they communicate with audibly. And that's our goal, is to link up our communities of chimpanzees in the park in their own terms if they choose to. So the thought would be they press a FaceTime button, a light comes on in, say, Hananya's house. Somebody in Hananya's group of 19 can choose to go over and have a bit of FaceTime with Sally's group or not. So it will be on their own terms.
So you actually answered another question about what's the purpose of FaceTime versus...
I wrap it all up.
Is it unsatisfying if the primates only get visual images rather than tactile stimulation?
Well, once again, because our raison d'etre is to get them rehabilitated with others of their own kind. In the end, the most important thing for a chimpanzee and for most of our primates, bar perhaps our loris and our orangutan, is being in a community of their own kind. And Itai, what you're saying there is that immediately, as soon as we get chimpanzees, we have chimpanzees who come in pretty much mute. And it's interesting to watch them when they've been stolen from the wild at such a young age and raised in bizarre circumstances. You bring them into a house separate and protected before we begin the integration process with others, and they can hear them, and the vocalizations, they come, you can hear them beginning to find the keys to their life again, and the most important aspect is to be with others of their own kind, and that's what we focus on. We just think that within our captive situation, because they are staying with us, that this might provide them another form of taking control of their lives and communicating with others of their own kind.
So you referred, Alison, to being treated as an unofficial human, and one of the questions is, why did that turn out to be a bad thing?
All of the chimpanzees that we're rescuing are being treated as unofficial humans, and I can only view that as a bad thing. Biomedical laboratories, I have a lot of chimps from labs, unofficial human beings being tested on. Part of the pet trade, being dressed up as human beings, dragged around. The entertainment industry, again, unofficial human beings portrayed in situation comedies or otherwise. Every circumstance that I'm getting the chimps from, whether it's beach photographers' props or otherwise, they're being treated like pseudo-human beings. I look forward to the day when we campaign for rights for them as chimpanzees, not as humans. And for gorillas, for gorilla rights. There should be nothing shameful about campaigning for rights as a chimpanzee.
Exactly, and I think that answered the same question when Alison talked about chimpanzees coming in mute. We've learned that chimpanzees learn language from other chimpanzees that visit with them, and it's very easy to see how we can develop through the Interspecies Internet a lexicon for chimpanzee language. Because we have the recordings. We just need to do the big data, the metadata, the big data mining to do it.
So this is for Sarah. How could dog cognitive discrimination trials be helpful to the dogs in animal shelters?
Oh, I'd love to do this. The hardest thing about working in shelters is that you are taking away, if you're doing experiments with them, you're working with the staff and you're working with the animals. And the last thing that you want to do is deter a potential adopter, make it so that that dog doesn't get out of that shelter. So one of the good things about working with shelters is, yes, you can potentially create discrimination-style games that you could use, but you want to make them easy enough so that they could be used immediately. So how do you come up then with a computer or a touchscreen system that you can then get a dog to interact with without any training, that is enriching and isn't stressful? So using things like the treat and train dispensers is a good one. It's not a screen, but you can put it in the kennel with them, and if they sit, you can reward it. So you don't have to be in the kennel with the animal. You can get them to interact with it, but the last thing you want to do is take away the time from potential adopters to have your presence there.
At the risk of sounding rude. I hope this doesn't turn into the moral equivalent of putting kids in front of television sets, letting the TVs be babysitters.
Yeah.
So we want to be careful about that. Roger, has anyone looked at the relationship between the whale and Indri vocalizations, which sound very similar in many ways? That's Roger's over. Oh, this is from
panel.
okay, so
I just heard those INRI vocalizations just a little while ago, so I can't answer that question. Sorry. Ignorant.
too bad if you asked. Okay.
The answer is yes. There are people.
And, wait, take a microphone if you will.
We're going to do lightning talk, so you can
Okay, why don't we, let's turn that into a lightning talk. Meanwhile, you need to scroll, we've already asked all these questions here. We run out?
Yeah.
That was it? Wow, that's amazing. So do the panelists have anything to say to each other? Any questions you have after hearing each other's presentations?
I have something I want to say. If you haven't read the book, If you haven't read the book called Your Fish Book, what is the title again?
What a Fish Knows.
What a Fish Knows. I would find it hard to recommend it with strong enough words. It's just superb. Do read it.
Your check will be in the mail, Roger.
So I actually have another question, but I'm not quite sure if it's appropriately addressed to this group. I had read a book about octopi or octopuses, and I came away kind of shocked to discover that the octopi have extraordinary discrimination capabilities, and they also can figure things out, like how to unlock things and squeeze themselves from one place to another, recognize faces, and at least in one incident, a person was who in the lab was not liked much by one of the octopuses, and it squirted him every time he showed up. I mean, just, and so what is it with these octopi? I mean, I had no idea that they were such unfriendly characters.
Squids.
There's squids.
Yeah, the whole group.
And so, what do fish feel pain, and can they suffer? The answer is yes.
Cephalopod, dude.
Okay.
So really briefly, yes, they can do all that. But start with vision, and it's something I'll go through briefly in my lightning talk. But vision is very important, and distance vision is particularly important to octopuses who are very capable predators. They have extremely good visual acuity, and they have this big brain mated to that amazing eye of theirs. And I'll sort of leave it at that. It's just, otherwise it'll become a serious spoiler alert, and I don't want to go there. But let's start with that.
Sure.
And fish, do fish feel pain?
Yeah, I dedicate quite a bit of my book to fish pain. There's a number of studies, anatomy studies on trout, for instance, showing they have the same 3 kinds of nociceptors we have to mechanical, heat, and chemical sources of pain. And also studies that show that fishes who would normally not swim to a part of their tank that's brightly lit with nowhere to hide. That's not a likable place for a fish to be, a little fish. But if you drop a pain reliever in there, lidocaine in this case, the ones who've been injected with acid, unfortunate ones being injected with acids, will swim across and spend time there. They soon divine that this is a way to relieve their pain, whereas the control group injected with a saline solution will stay put in the better side of the tank where they feel safer. So a fish has the wherewithal to seek pain relief and is willing to pay a cost to get pain relief. I think that's a pretty compelling paradigm to show that they experience pain.
So I have another question that has to do with species annihilation. I'm not sure that the general public understands very much about things like food chains and the consequences of species extinction, and the cascading effects of that. Do you suppose that's also an important thing that we need to communicate?
I'll just say that's the working theory of change of most conservation organizations now. If you can do a better job of understanding and communicating how nature contributes to people, it'll make a difference. It's a largely untested hypothesis, right? Because people have so many things to worry about. And if I don't eat this, I'll eat that without necessarily thinking through all of the issues. So talking about fish and pain, I mean, many people who are trying to figure out where is the world going to get its future protein from, its micronutrients, are turning to the sea as if it were just a giant machine for producing food without thinking about what are the impacts. And what are the impacts of losing nature, too, because we value those fish and as living wildlife. So it is very complicated, and it's one of these things where people can only digest so much information. So you can't explain every component of nature that's important to them.
Now, let me flip this around for a second and ask about the inverse of species annihilation, and that's species creation. While we're busy trying to figure out which species are disappearing, is anybody figuring out how many new species, if any, are being created? Is there any indication of that? And I guess probably we have a problem telling what's new and what is something we just didn't
Because, for
discover.
instance, when I go to Mali, I go and talk with the tribal indigenous elders, and they tell me, oh yes, we have a new population of chimpanzees living in the arid climate here. That was where my study began. Nobody knew that chimpanzees live in arid climates. And when you ask the elders, nobody ever asks them if they exist. And then you're going into the other realms of what other species exist in Mali. And they say, oh, we have oases here, but no white man has ever been there. And we have many diverse species from prehistory. And then you go into Niger, and you have these isolated pockets of Sahara, which are still green. And nobody ever goes to these areas. So when I go to the tribes in Mali, I do participatory ethnography. I just sit with them. I sleep in the tribe for months at a time, just to try to grasp the immensity of you are going into gullies and cliffs with animal species that nobody has ever documented before, because nobody went there because it's a war-torn land or other different things like that.
Oh, there's, oh. Yeah, absolutely.
What would you do if I said no?
Or I would have given it to Roger.
Don't go far away. We're out of time.
Okay. All right. Just very briefly to answer your question. We are losing probably at best one species a day, probably more than one species a day, at a phenomenal rate right now. Much of that is due to human activity. Now, there are new species that are arising, but that takes time. We know, for example, that one of the ways that species arise is by having the gene flow of one population cut off from the gene flow of another population. This, in some estimates, takes place over thousands of years, and in some cases, like with some insects and with some plants, it can take place over months or a year. But if we're losing one species a day, we are out of time. The rate at which we have new species arising is so much slower than the rate of extinction. So I don't think we're going to get there.
Okay, so according to you, we're out of time. Actually, when you showed me 3:31, I thought that was how many minutes were left, because that's what this clock was telling me, the countdown clock.
You have 2 more minutes.
No, I don't have to have 2 more minutes. I think we want to thank the panel, however, for really thought-provoking.